everyone. Welcome to the special work session for City Council, Planning Commission, and Architectural Advisory Committee. And this is a joint meeting to discuss state housing legislation and consider adoption of interim objective design standards for multifamily development. We will just have a roll call right now.
Committee Member Hooker. Committee Member Pansini. Commissioner Gorn. Commissioner Hernandez.
Here.
Commissioner Reddick.
Here.
Vice Chair Joannis.
Here.
Chair Gossett.
Here.
Councilmember Nagengast.
Here.
Councilmember Johnson.
Here.
Councilmember Penrose.
Here.
Vice Mayor Reddick.
Here.
Mayor Brownstone.
Here.
You have a quorum.
Thank you. Are we going to begin with a staff report? Great, thanks.
Sorry, I thought you were going to ask if we were going to do another Pledge of Allegiance. I think we all
I think once does
tonight.
it. Great, thank you.
Yeah. I'll just make a brief introduction and then we'll turn the time over to staff. As everybody knows, this is an item that has been before the Planning Commission and the Architectural Advisory Committee in the past, and we've had a subcommittee working on it. And last week, was it just last Tuesday? 2 weeks ago. 2 weeks ago, we brought the item to council to just get a little bit of direction on the timing. And it became very clear at that meeting that although the path we were on was a good path as far as getting the full standards in place, there was some urgency to do something before the end of this year, which as the city shuts down for the holidays is coming very quickly. And so we're grateful to everybody for making themselves available tonight on short notice to hold this session. The goal of tonight is to get some information, additional information, have a good discussion, and respond to the draft standards that were part of the council packet tonight. Those were not intended to be the be-all end-all, but provide something for you all to respond to. You could see a format and some of the thinking that has gone on behind the scenes with the subcommittee and in the previous meetings. Tonight's meeting, we have two different staff presentations. The first will be Mike Noche from Community Development, and he will just talk briefly about some of the different housing laws that are in place and coming online and how they interplay with each other. And that'll include a couple of case studies of some sites here in Half Moon Bay. And that is really not the focus of the meeting tonight, but we think it's important context to drive the secondary conversation or the primary conversation, which is to really get in and dig in on the objective design standards. So we've got about a 10-minute presentation from Mike, and we can take questions and have discussion afterwards. But again, I just want to clarify that's not the focus of tonight's meeting. It's contextual for the primary conversation. So with that, I'll turn the time over to Mike, and then I'll provide a little more context before the next presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Matthew. Not used to this mic, so everyone can hear me okay? All right, thank you. So good evening, Mayor Brownstone, City Council, Planning Commission, and Architectural Advisory Committee members. Mike Noche, Housing Programs Manager for the city. Happy to be here this evening to share some background for you. I'm going to move through my presentation as expeditiously as possible. I know we have many of you here tonight and want to give you all an opportunity to discuss. We'll be available for any questions. So if I move through things quickly, please let me know when the time comes. So to start, and I think this is good information for all, including the public in attendance and watching, there's been a significant volume of new or amended housing laws that have come through the state. Since 2017 is really when we saw a very large uptick. Roughly over 300 plus new housing laws have come through. Every jurisdiction in California has had to keep up with all of these laws and all of the nuances and where they overlapped, where they conflict, and where they potentially conflict with existing process and so forth. So wanted to highlight that to start. These new laws, there's applicability in regards to how they apply to certain jurisdictions. Half Moon Bay, as all of you know, is entirely within the coastal zone and an important component to highlight for you this evening. The regional housing needs allocation, you will hear that referenced, and I wanted to highlight that as well, often referred to as RHNA, but our allocation for cycle 6 for the city of Half Moon Bay is 480 units. The RHNA is our required amount of development, and there is housing legislation that is tied to those development numbers to make you familiar with, and the public as well. Moving on, a couple laws that we'd like to, obviously we'll be discussing with you this evening is SB 35, which was originally passed in 2017. Half Moon Bay was exempt from this law because we are entirely within the coastal zone. This SB 35 allows for, all right, that sounds better, thank you. SB 35 requires project approval, meeting ministerial approval when projects meet certain criteria. And it applies to jurisdictions that are not meeting their RHNA. SB 423 is the follow-up legislation that is connected to SB 35. It extends the timeline through 2036, so it will be here for years to come. And it does make SB 35 provisions and adds to some of those provisions, and you'll learn more about that as well. And it applies to the coastal zone beginning January 1st. The objective design standards are options for every jurisdiction can institute objective design standards to institute control over how development comes through the city, even though it is a ministerial approval process. Also would like to highlight for you this evening, density bonus law is discussed at length for many projects up and down the state. This allows projects that meet a certain affordability, affordable units, low or lower, so inclusive of very low income, extremely low income development. If they have a certain number of units included in their project, they can they can go over the density that is typically allowed by zoning or a city's jurisdiction's general plan. Just for example, if a market rate project included 20 units and they had 5 low-income units, they could seek a 50% density bonus and go up to 30 units. Those density bonus units, the extra 10 that were added on to what was originally allowed as a 20-unit project, those additional 10 above the existing density, for example, would not have to be affordable, just the 5 low-income units that were originally proposed. And there are many nuances in density bonus law. This is just a high-level example. It is also important to call out that 100% affordable housing development has a different set of guidelines. For being 100% affordable, you're pretty much automatically can seek a 80% density bonus, or if you're within certain provisions, you can seek a super density bonus, which is unlimited density and a maximum height over the current zoning of an additional 33 feet or 3 stories typically. These provisions are tied to the major transit stop definition, as many are aware. There are additional incentives and waivers that can include height, parking reductions, et cetera, that are included for 100% affordable projects. For building heights, there is some nuance here. Heights are established through the city's existing zoning. Objective design standards cannot downzone, that is prohibited by state law. There's nuance in that statement as well. There would have to be a balance. If you were to downzone in one area, you would have to upzone in another. That is state law. Density bonus does supersede many of those standards, which is where you get the additional height and additional density. This is a map of SB 423 sites that are in the city. So in the staff report, you saw a grayed out version of this. This basically adds building height to those areas of the city that are applicable to where 423 is applicable. You'll also notice we've called out a couple sites, 940 Main Street in particular, as well as 740 Parissima, where the local coastal land use plan does designate them as being upzoned and to R3, which would increase the height. So at this stage, there's a few sites that we've highlighted in the staff report, and I'm just going to give a little additional background. I'll move through these fairly quickly, and again, happy to answer questions. So 940 Main Street, it is applicable under the SB 35 423 provisions. Right now, we do have a Measure D application from Mid-Penn Housing for 52 units on this site. It is 100% affordable, so it could seek density bonus provisions. Right now, it is proposed at 3 stories, and the 52 units is under the allowable density of what the land use plan R3 would outline. So they're actually 3 units under the max density for the site, technically. Again, there's nuance on every project, and what development path a developer decides to move forward with is potentially up to them and what is granted to them by state law. Turning attention to 498 Kelly, which is the school district, CUSD school district main office, as well as Hatch Elementary and Pilarcitos High School site. The city has received a preliminary application for a proposed 60 units on the site. This is only possible with the workforce housing overlay, which is a part of the land use plan. The height that it's proposed is at 4 stories. A density bonus could be applied under certain circumstances if there was affordability built into that project as well. But it could apply under SB 35 and 423. The third property we wanted to highlight is 740 Parissima Street, also applicable to the 423 provisions. We do not have an application. The site is one of our opportunity sites in the housing element, the Cycle 6 housing element. We do not have an application for this site, however, it is for sale, and that is why staff wanted to highlight it to you in case we have received phone calls about potential development here on this site. We don't have an application, but wanted to highlight it as a potential interest in the community. There are many different development pathways. One nuance that I'd like to highlight for you all is that under SB 35 and 423, no existing rental housing could be scraped from the site. So if someone wanted to redevelop the entire site and demolish the existing structures or existing rental housing structures, they could not use SB 35 423. It would only permit them to develop on, say, the back portion, essentially the west side or southwest side of the property there. There's a garage that could likely be demolished, and there is driveway access to the rear of the property. I did not want to speculate on how many units would fit there specifically, but there is space for development in the back, in the rear. If someone, on the flip side, if someone did decide to scrape the entire property, it's about a half-acre site, and under R3, you'd be looking at 30 dwelling units per acre, so half of that, roughly around 15 units, could potentially go on the site as what standard zoning allows. If it was an affordable project or had affordability, that is where the density bonus could raise the allowable density on that site. Hilltop Mobile Home Park. This does not apply to SB 35 and 423, and I understand the question of why include it, but it's a project that is of interest in the community as a naturally affordable housing type, and staff felt it compelled to at least bring it up and mention that it does not apply under SB 35 and 423 laws, so the owner could not change to a different use and utilize SB 35, 423 provisions. It is zoned and is currently outlined in the LCLUP as for modular for mobile homes. In closing, I did want to mention that it is, and this is just more of an observation from staff, but the continual theme from the legislature is that they are diminishing local control. That seems to be a very purposeful action that the legislature is taking, which is why you are seeing this inclusion of the coastal zone. So happy to answer questions, but I wanted to highlight that as of interest to you all, and I know many of you are well aware of this fact, but wanted to highlight it as something staff continues to observe and hasn't seen anything that would indicate that that will change in the future, and thought it was pertinent to at least highlight that in closing. So I'll be available for questions, but open to your discussion.
So we haven't done one of these tripartite meetings in a while, so I'll just kind of go with each group first, starting with the Architectural Advisory Committee. Any questions? Okay. I'll go over to Planning Commission. Any questions, clarifying questions from Planning Commission? Yeah, Margaret?
Thank you, Mike, for the presentation. I wanted to ask about 940 Main Street, the hypothetical. Well, I guess it's not hypothetical because there's a proposed project for 52 units and an application for 52 Measure D. Given that they're not asking for bonus density or super bonus density at this time, if they are allocated the 52 Measure D and then turn around in 2 years and decide, hey, we want to go with super density bonus, we know with super density bonus that the full amount of Measure D isn't required, because we just went through that with 555 Kelly. 555 Kelly for 40 units only needed 10. So my question is their project plan locked in if we allocate 52 Measure D?
All we have current time is just their Measure D proposal, because it's a requirement to at least include an outline, which is how we know it's, I mean, we've had meetings with MidPen in regards to how they apply for Measure Ds and refreshing them on that, but it is required for them to turn in an overview of the site of what they have planned. It is not a preliminary application by any means, so they have not firmly decided on their development pathway. I hope that helps answer the question.
Well, because the Measure D is, you can't transfer them from year to year, and you can't transfer them from project to project. So I guess my question is if we award 52 allocations, and then 2 years later, they ask for 5 or 6 stories, and the super density bonus allows that. That impacts development of other projects and they're not even in the downtown area. So that's why I'm just wondering how the town manages that. And maybe that's a legal question. I don't know if you're able to answer that, Catherine.
I can start.
Why don't you go ahead and start, Mike, and I need to add.
Typically, a developer that is going to be bringing that many units that would need a Measure D would need to look for a pathway that allows for that within Measure D. I'm not the Measure D expert within the city. We have planning staff that do focus on that area, but from my preliminary assumptions, they would definitely need most likely some sort of phasing agreement if they were to essentially set aside a specific number of units so that other development could still have access to Measure D allocations, so that they aren't using up all the allocations. There are nuances within Measure D that limit the number when there's an over subscription of Measure Ds that are being sought by property owners. So last year, I think they actually requested more than 5, but they were only allocated 5 because there was an oversubscription of Measure D applications that came into the city. So they could only be awarded 5 in that scenario.
So they've already been acquiring allocations. Is that what you're saying for this project?
Yes,
Okay.
sorry, and I could have clarified that in the presentation. The Measure D application that we received was from last year.
Okay.
Allocations. So they do have 5 Measure D allocations awarded to this site. And they had site control through the purchase agreement with the seller for the property.
And I have one more question, and it's regarding, I think, the 940, it is still 940. There's already a rental house. How is that handled? Because you said that the SB 423 and 35 don't apply if they're going to scrape a rental. And there is a family of teachers, I think, living in that house. So how is that handled?
Yeah, the current plan in regards to new development that would go on the site would not touch the existing home. The existing home would remain in its exact location, I believe, is what Mid-Penn Housing is planning.
Thank you. Thank you, Mike. That's it for me.
Thanks, Margaret. Any other clarifying questions from Planning Commission?
Sure.
Rick?
Is there a rental property at 740 Parisima Street?
There are 5.
Okay, so under state law, those couldn't be removed to make way for ministerial approval, except for the portion where there's no house.
Under SB 35 and 423, yes, they could not be removed if a developer came in and wanted to utilize those ministerial streamlining state law. There could be some housing accountability law that I'm potentially forgetting at the moment in regards to removal of housing units. But I think if you're going over the number produced, then I want to say you land okay. But to utilize SB 35 and 423, you would not be able to scrape those 5 rental units, correct?
And in how many units did you say are planned for the unscraped portion of 740?
We don't have an application. There are no plans for development on that site, but we have received questions about the site, being it's for sale, from the real estate community of potential interested buyers.
So if half of the lot was available, how many units of housing could be there under current?
It depends on the development type, but anywhere between 5 and 10 roughly. But I don't want to, there's many development pathways that someone could explore.
And under current zoning, that's a 40-foot height limit in that area?
Yes, that is, under the land use plan, it is designated to be rezoned as R3, which would go up to 40 feet.
So if somebody wanted to build a project that was 100% affordable, they could go 73 feet tall and make that 6 stories at that location?
I believe so, yes, that sounds
Okay.
right.
And there's nothing right now in our existing objective design standards that would prevent that, correct?
They wouldn't be able to seek, so I believe in order to get to that height, I don't know that they could reach that conclusion under the objective design standard. I mean, that's under the scenario if you're only developing the back portion of the property. So I'd have to, there'd be a lot of staff analysis related to that. I'm not necessarily prepared to go into those specifics tonight, to be honest with you.
And if I may, really quick, as Mike pointed out in the presentation, objective design standards cannot be, under state law, cannot be utilized to reduce the height. So.
Over what's zoned and also what's allowable under super density bonus law, is that correct?
Correct.
And what provides the nexus for super density bonus law at that location?
So super density bonus law at that location, if it's 100% affordable and it is theoretically within the definition of a major transit stop, it would potentially apply for the super density bonus. But that would be a determination we would make upon receiving an application.
And the definition of major transit stop changes on January 1st under AB 2553, is that correct?
Yes, if that's the one that I mentioned in the staff report, that would change the headways from 15 minutes to 20 minutes.
And there's more than one change though, correct? In 2553, there's more changes than just the timing.
The main change that I was referring to there is the change of the public resource code definition.
And this is now the primary, because I know in the past there's been confusion around what standard we apply to density bonus law and super density bonus law. This is now the primary thing that we use for all of these super density, density bonus law, and the two new changes that are coming before us, correct?
Yeah, the super density bonus previously and starting January 1 was still pointed to the definition in the public resource code definition. So it utilizes that definition in density bonus law. The law that you just mentioned changes that definition, and other laws will typically include a reference to that as well as state density bonus.
So January 1st, there's at least two changes to the definition of state density bonus law that are coming before us. I think there's also a third change that's coming, which is proposed projects or projects that aren't permanently funded and rideshare may not qualify for major transit hub. I'm not asking to make a decision. I'm just saying there's more than two changes. There's at least three changes that I'm aware of to the definition of major transit stop. And so for stuff that's already been approved, we've agreed that there's a major transit stop, but given that the law is changing, shouldn't we be taking a look at whether or not a major transit stop exists under new state law?
That would be part of our application process, and I don't mean to, but as I mentioned previously, we would analyze that upon an application coming into the city, and we would use current definitions coming in. So I believe you're correct on what you're suggesting there. We would analyze current state housing law, and I'm happy to turn it to Catherine if there's more to add. But
I have one last question before, if you do want to jump in. Who would be responsible for making that finding? Would it be a ministerial finding, or would this be something that comes to the Planning Commission with the oversight of the City Council?
a developer typically submits their application seeking certain provisions of density bonus law, which they will outline in their application. Staff, as well as our city attorney's office, would review that and make a recommendation to the Planning Commission or City Council for whoever is approving that project. If it was a SB 35-423 project, it would, and it met the criteria for such, which staff and city attorney's office would determine. And there's probably a process in regards to how we inform our commission and council on that process, on what's coming in under 423 and provisions. But in that scenario, a application would have ministerial approval if it met all of the criteria.
And
It would not go to the Planning Commission or City Council.
So you would just make a determination as to whether or not a major transit stop exists under the new
Mike,
law.
let me jump in on this. I think I understand the question. If it's a non-SB 35-423 project, it's going to come to the commission, and that's where that discussion would take place. Mike is correct that if it is under SB 35-423, it would be at the staff's determination. But given the changes to the law, I think we all agree that it would necessitate us taking it up to the commission and the council to reevaluate that under the new laws.
Thank you. One last question. I'm under the impression that we have several state agencies debating with one another about whether or not Measure D will even exist in 6 weeks, 8 weeks. So anything we do should probably plan that Measure D may no longer be an option. Is that a fair way for us to be thinking about what we're doing? Not necessarily tonight, but as part of our planning process, as we think about objective design standards, that Measure D initiative may go away altogether.
So I can speak to the letters that we have received. Our latest letter on our draft Cycle 6 housing element that went to the state for their 60-day review, we did receive a letter in response. We have it posted on the city's website. It is under, just for everyone listening, www.hmbcity.com/housing. You'll see a tab for the housing element, and you can navigate to that page, and we have this letter posted there. In that letter, it does state that the Measure D voter-initiated ballot measure is in violation of state housing law under the, I believe the state is, or HCD reviewers are quoting the Housing Crisis Act as well as potentially ADU law as well, and could be, it essentially is telling the city to cease using Measure D. There has continued to be determinations in regards to applicability within the coastal zone, and there is a nuance that we are seeking guidance on that from HCD, and HCD also includes in that letter that there will be an additional letter that will be sent to the city to make that determination, and HCD has outlined that they'll be in communication with the Coastal Commission to make those findings. So we have not received that letter to date. We are still awaiting that determination.
Thank you. I did have one final thing. At 498 Kelly, you said there's a project that could go there for teacher housing or workforce housing because of our workforce housing overlay. I think that area is currently zoned for 3 stories.
I believe zoning allows 4 stories,
4 stories
40 feet.
So you could have at that location where the Parissima Intermediate or the Parissima School is right now, right on that corner, in that area, you could go 7 stories.
Only if the owner and developer decided to include affordable units.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
As defined by state law. The proposal that we received, I don't know that it actually included affordable units. I think there was some concerns there with the school district. They were making them affordable, but whether or not, we hadn't reached the determination and we haven't received an updated application to date, so I'd be speculative on whether or not, but.
I mean, any housing that a teacher or custodial staff could afford would by definition be affordable. So, but theoretically they could put a 7-story building there and we'd have no oversight very little oversight over where we sit right now.
Well, if that's under the presumption that super density bonus applies. Mm-hmm. I don't know for a fact that it does at that site. It is far enough away from previous determinations on super density bonus applicability that it may be outside those boundaries. So I don't know that scenario is possible.
Okay.
May I follow up with a question on that? That site is west of Highway 1. I thought super density bonus law did not apply west of Highway 1.
There's provisions of, I believe it's the SB 35 423 that's within a certain distance, but is it? And it's not in the appeals zone, so I think it could apply, is my understanding.
And I just want to add one thing, is that the density bonus law does have a Coastal Act carve-out. So there is still a requirement to ensure that, that the project complies with the Coastal Act and our LCP.
Is there any specific provision of the Coastal Act that you're aware of that it wouldn't comply with at 7 stories?
I would have to do an analysis, but I'm just noting that there are protections for, respect to visual resources and coastal access.
I have a question with regard to the 498 Kelly Avenue. Is the applicant the state? The school district, the state? And the reason why I'm asking is because I was under the impression that under 423, the state would have jurisdiction, even though it is in the coastal zone now, through 423, the state would have jurisdiction over the development standards and the design and the height. So I just wanted to get clarity on that. I didn't, I was under that impression. I thought I read somewhere that the General Services Administration or department would take control over that.
State architect, I know. I can help with that response. So my understanding is that any school facilities that are built do get reviewed by the state architect, and still the school district, I believe, that's making this application to the state for approval in that scenario. But for a housing site on school district land, the local jurisdiction is who makes the determinations on project approvals, because it is specifically housing. I don't know all the legal ramifications of that. This is based on early conversations with the school district on who would be, if the city in fact would be reviewing when we receive that preliminary.
If we could get clarification on that at some point, because I thought I read that the state would take over on their properties, their design and their approvals. I could be wrong, and I could have read it incorrectly, but I just wanted to make sure that I didn't read it wrong.
Yeah, understood. I'm sure we can work with Catherine and her team to find out more information and confirm that. My understanding is that is strictly for school sites, but obviously we can get back to everyone on that.
Okay. Council, any questions?
No questions.
Clarification questions?
Thank you, through the mayor. And maybe I'm asking more for some boundary guidance, since the new guy here, there's another new guy. I won't take full credit being the only new guy. But trying to understand, and I see it's already, how the time can really get away from us. And I know we're trying to just do interim. I look at this as an interim because this is something that we're really going to be diving much, much deeper in. And this is something to have January 1st. And with the transit stop, or major transit lines, I can see a conversation can go on for a while on that, and then what the city would do. So I'm wondering if there's something that could be, we're doing resolutions for something for January 1st. If there's something that could be put in there to acknowledge something, and somebody may have to help me how I'm trying to get this out, where it's just not totally ministerial. To me, it puts staff in an awkward position if they're making a determination on a major transit stop, if something happened just to come in January 5th, where we didn't define it, but try and keep something that the community understands. No, we haven't defined that yet. We can't make that decision yet without trying to define it tonight.
Was that a question?
Yeah, I'm trying to figure out, is there something we can do? Because we could talk a long time on the 294 and the 117 bus service and what stops and how frequently they do and whether they really do every 20 minutes. I mean, I'm just trying to, that conversation needs to be done. We need to decide, do we have a major transit stop or do we have major transit lines? But I'm not trying to get into it. I don't know if we need to do it tonight. Maybe we do, but I didn't know if there's something that could be part of this stopgap that we're trying to get in by January 1st.
I will just note that this is part one of the presentation, and there will be part two of the presentation with a staff presentation regarding the objective design standards that are before you in terms of interim guidance. So I guess maybe one suggestion might be, in terms of your question or suggestion, can we just adopt these and or add to them? Perhaps to hold that question, and with the second part of the presentation, there'll be more information regarding the proposal.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember.
Yeah, I don't necessarily want to defer that conversation, and the reason is, to me, it's the fundamental issue, the resolution of which will have a great impact on future development, especially in the downtown area. And it's very clear to me what the law says about what a major transit stop is. And in fact, the bill that passed and that becomes law on the 1st actually struck out the language on-demand transit service and micro-transit service. It's not that he didn't address it, they struck it out. And they struck it out because they didn't want jurisdictions to use Uber and Lyft and other rideshare, Waymo or whatever, to, serve as, the impetus for this sort of stuff, the reason for making ministerial decisions. So I'm not in favor of allowing this to become a ministerial decision, honestly. And I think we ought to come up with something tonight before the 1st that says, we will define major transit stop according to existing state law that becomes law on January 1. I'm not willing to leave that decision to staff because I think we made a mistake on 555 Kelly. I don't think we can address that now, but I don't want to make the same mistake going forward. It was already not in the law. On-demand transit was not in the law, not to be used as a major transit stop. And I go to the Samtrans site, they identify major transit stops. And the ones that we used are not major transit stops according to Samtrans. So I'm not willing to be fuzzy on this. I'm not willing to have 7, 8, 9-story buildings downtown. And I think the way to get at that is for us to define tonight, give direction on what the definition is going to be for major transit. And if that definition changes, if the law changes next year or 2 years down the road, then we can deal with that then. But right now, the law, excludes intentionally on-demand transit. So I think we ought to just stand by that and make a policy decision that that's where we're coming down like right now and going forward as of January 1.
Is this a law that's passed?
Yes, it
And will
becomes
become effective January the 1st?
January 1. And when they were doing the law, they struck out the language of on-demand transit.
Yeah, I heard you.
Yeah, so.
I'd like to hear from council on that, your opinion.
To the chair.
Hang on, no, I want to, on that point that Councilmember Reddick just brought up. Catherine, if you can address.
So the before the council is a resolution that proposes adoption of the interim objective design standards. The current draft of the interim design standards really focuses on design, site layout, aesthetic concerns. And certainly, staff applies existing law. So if a project application were to come in, it would be reviewed for compliance with all state laws, including whether a superdensity bonus applied at the time of the submittal, doesn't meet the current definition of major transit stop, have the bus routes changed such that it would apply. Is there case law defining major transit stop? That would all be considered at the time of project application. One idea to address Councilmember Ruddick or Nagangas and Vice Mayor's suggestion would be the council could consider to put something in the resolution acknowledging and directing staff to apply existing state law at the time of any project application that were to come in that relied on these interim objective design standards. In terms of I'm trying to make a connection to what's before you tonight.
Yeah, but that still leaves a time frame of uncertainty between now and January 2nd, right? Unless we pass an interim.
If you adopted it tonight, it could go into effect immediately. The guidance to staff to apply existing state law. I guess if you're saying if you got a project application between now and January 1, I think the risk of that is very small.
I would want to say state statute, as opposed to opening the door to evaluations of case law that might be vague and subject to subjective interpretation. But I'd rather say existing statute.
Whatever we decide would not apply retroactively, right, to existing
Correct, to be forward-looking.
determinations, right? Any downside of doing what Councilmember Reddick is suggesting and Councilmember and
I mean, I don't see anything. Staff certainly would apply existing state statute and, ensure any project application, complied with that. So I think it would be memorializing the process. I do want to check in with the city manager here for his perspective.
I guess my question was, we talked about earlier that if one of these applications, an AB 35, that came forward that included the superdensity bonus application, that we would bring that piece of it before our legislative bodies here. I don't think that changes if we add this language, because no matter what we say, we're still forced to interpret the law at that time. And so I guess the question would be, regardless of what we put into this resolution, do we still have a path where a discussion could be had to make sure that the interpretation we're making is agreed upon by our legislative bodies?
If a project comes in under SB 35, the intention is to be a staff level decision.
Yeah.
So there certainly would, I guess I just want to emphasize that it is intended to be streamlined. And so going to council for additional guidance, the applicant could be opposed to that.
So then, is there something we can do to address council's concerns here tonight that basically, if and when staff are put in the position to make this determination, it's crystal clear, it's objective, what we're going to determine, right? I mean, that's, I think, what we're talking about here. Legally objective.
It is objective to say staff you must comply with, or that staff will apply the existing law and the statutes on the books at the time. So, like that would be memorializing the process. And it memorializes the current process too. If staff determines any application that comes in, it makes sure it complies with our code. If it doesn't comply with the code, then, well, do you want to proceed? We'll take forward a zoning code amendment, an LCP amendment. That would be the path if it didn't qualify for superdensity bonus. And then it would go through the normal process, with Planning Commission and Council decision and Coastal Commission certification.
Well, it's aligning what theoretically would be less unambiguous after January.
Could I ask a question on this? Wouldn't, if we don't do what Ms. Ruddick is suggesting and amend what we're up to tonight and be clear about that, wouldn't the precedent of what we did with 555 Kelly carry? Wouldn't someone be in a position to say, this is the way the city sees their transit thing, so there's my application? It seems to me her idea that we modify our endeavor tonight is appropriate.
I think several folks have pointed out the definition of major transit stop has changed, or will change January 1. And, certain facts on the ground have changed as well in terms of bus routes. They change every year. So I guess that's the reason for my suggestion that you were not tied to the precedent because the law has changed and the facts have changed.
Yeah, I think you pointed out something that's always going to be a challenge here, which is the application of this statute, even with a plain reading, requires us to do an analysis because things change. The practical application of it changes, right? Bus routes change, bus frequency changes. That's the challenge here is I think staff is being put in the position by this law to, if you had that joint application where it met the streamlined ministerial review and it was super density bonus, staff would be forced to do that analysis and make that interpretation. Obviously, it's clear how folks feel tonight, but we'd still be forced with every application to make that determination, and I guess it's not as objective as we'd like it to be.
Yeah, Councilmember.
Maybe I can help us take an easier approach. Rather than arguing over what is a major transit stop, maybe we just say that we will not use on-demand or microtransit to qualify as a major transit stop. That still leaves you to look at bus times and bus routes and making that decision. But in the meantime, to be consistent with state law, we say very clearly we will not use on-demand or microtransit to qualify for a super density bonus. And that lets you interpret major transit stop in other ways.
Under a more objective lens because it's the
Yes.
20 minutes. Can we cite the recent changes to code as the reason that this is being stated too?
I think we wouldn't even need to, but yes, that would be the basis. And I think I think that's a good suggestion. And I would just add to it that we would probably want to say, unless the law is changed to provide otherwise. So if the legislature comes out and says, amend the law next year and says, well, actually, we looked at this more and actually microtransit does qualify, then of course we would have to yield to that.
So then just, bifurcate the major transit issue into on-demand, microtransit, and regular transit. And that, I think, makes it a lot easier.
Then if we're going to be dealing with Uber and Lyft, and since we don't have any major transit stops in Half-Moon and have no indication from any of the transportation services servicing our city that we ever will have a major transit stop here, why don't we just make a declaration that Half-Moon Bay doesn't have any major transit stops?
Under the new state law.
Under state, well, what's curious to me, if understanding the reason why they retracted that line, it's just a mystery to me. Then why didn't they just say specifically this, and that will not qualify? To make it explicit. It's odd to me that they wouldn't do that. Leaving these things open is always an issue.
Well,
To interpretation.
having been a legislative analyst for the state, that's how the sausage making is done. It's done with underline and strike throughs. So, you can go back and look at the committee hearing about it online where they argue about this. And then the upshot was, we're just going to take it out because it just opens a can of worms. Because then you're going to have all kinds of on-demand transit, functioning here, and that's not our intention, right? We're actually, because the consistency with state transit policy was the main thrust of these things. The fundamental laws about this are, transit-oriented communities. How do we locate housing in major transit corridors? And by opening the door to on-demand transit and microtransit, then you can have development almost anywhere. So it defeated the purpose of the original greenhouse gas laws to locate housing along major transit corridors. So if you understand the history of the policy, you understand where they were coming from and just taking it out. And you can see their intention by watching these committee hearings. So I think the cleanest thing to do is for us to do the same thing they did. And just, take it out of consideration for the time being and just say, consistent with state statute, we will not consider using on-demand or microtransit to qualify super density bonus projects, consistent with state law. and then just leave the interpretation like, the bus routes will change, maybe they'll get more frequent, all that stuff. You can still make those determinations, but you've eliminated the key problem, which is the on-demand transit.
Do you have enough direction now? Because I agree. Anything to remove ambiguity between now, adoption of the new law, and let the legislature decide. Because it's not just us who will be dealing with this. So,
Yeah, that is good direction. Again, we haven't gotten to the objective design standards part of the presentation, but if and when I think basically we could add a now therefore to that resolution to add, now therefore be it further resolved that consistent with state statute, the city will not consider microtransit, on-demand transit to qualify projects for to qualify projects for a major transit stop unless directed otherwise by state law or something like that. I can craft it a little bit better between now and when you get to that point in the meeting.
Can I ask a question? Is there a difference between?
Can you wait one moment? Just one last question. Do you think doing this will in any way impact decisions made about our housing element by the state?
I think I'm probably speculating at this point, so I would see if Matthew or Mike.
We can only speculate on that. I don't think it's probably worth our energy to speculate on that. They're paying attention to us.
I'm just trying to consider every downside.
Well, HCD actually deferred. Staff wrote the letter to HCD asking them to make a determination about on-demand transit, and they deferred because the state rejected it. So they didn't want to weigh in where the state's already said no, right? So that's why. So we've already, and it's in the staff report. Staff did their homework, and HCD deferred on it. So they can't really say, well, you're ignoring us. Yeah.
Just wanted to cover the point.
Through the mayor, can I ask one more clarifying question?
Yeah. Sorry, go ahead, Hazel.
Is there a difference between a major transit stop and a major transit station? Because I noticed in the law it had two things, a transit station and a transit stop. And we certainly don't have a station. So I'm wondering if we can somehow include that, or if that's something that's up for discussion or not.
Do you want me to jump in? Yes, I don't believe we would have a transit station by any means. The Public Resource Code is specific to a stop. But I don't think under any criteria we would have a major transit station.
So by major transit station, do you also mean a major transit hub? Are they the same things, a station and a hub?
I'd be speculating, but I'd have to do further analysis on specific laws, but I think it would be safe to say to group those together, yes.
The other thing I'll just share is going back to the 555 Kelly project, staff and council and attorneys analyzed all the different components of the law, and the interpretation of the major transit stop was the path that worked. So I think I like the solution here because things are going to change and things can change, and we will be forced to analyze this with each application. And again, if it's tied to the AB 35 application, then staff has to do it on its own. If it's a traditional, process, then of course we'll do the analysis and bring it to you. But I don't think we can make determinations on things that we don't know. So I think the solution's good because what it does is it points out there's been a change in the law, in the statute, and this is what it doesn't allow us to do, and it's clear on that, and we'll still have to do the analysis. Is that fair? Yeah.
Great. Let's move on. If no other questions, want to go on to part B of tonight's, or do we need a break, 5-minute break? Just want to check in with everyone. Don't need a break? No. Need a break? Move on? Okay.
Okay, thank you, Mike. So next up, we'll have Okoye and Steve from Community Development. They will be specifically talking about the objective design standards. As I mentioned, we have included in the staff materials, in the council materials, some draft objective design standards. We don't expect that they're final. They hopefully incorporate, and you see the incorporation of the feedback that's been shared throughout this process, whether it's a subcommittee or the joint hearing that was held between the commission and the AAC previously. So ideally, there's enough there to respond to and to provide feedback on that we could clearly get to a decision tonight and actually have the city council adopt those interim design standards, knowing that we'll continue to work on these next year and refine them further. What I will say is, if we can't get to that level of definition, the next best thing would be enough direction that staff working with our consultants could make tweaks, and in order to have these in place before the first of the year, we'd have to schedule another special meeting, I would think just of the city council before we go to break, and adopt them at that point. Otherwise, we would have to wait until after the first and then schedule a special meeting to do that. So I think I'm being clear that there's a path to adoption tonight. There's also a path to adoption in the next week, if necessary, and that would meet the desire to have something interim in place before these laws take effect. So with that, we'll turn the time over to Okoye and Steve to present on the objective design standards. I think Okoye's you're connected now, yeah? Yeah, let's talk about the castle. What do we think? The AAC likes castles, it sounds like, so.
Two-minute break? 2-minute break?
I'm hearing an ask for a 2-minute break. Okay. Okay, let's start. Thanks.
Good evening, Mayor and City Council, as well as Planning Commission and Architectural Advisory Committee members. Thank you all for your patience and for joining us here tonight to be all together and go over these interim objective design standards. I'm going to touch briefly on a few things that my colleague Mike Noche has also touched on, just to provide a bit more background of why we're here and the specific legislation that's led us to develop these objective design standards. So as I mentioned, I'll talk a bit more about background, get into a few more details, discuss the purpose of these interim objective design standards, give you a brief overview on our process that we've gone through thus far, and then we have our professional consultants from MIG here who are going to present on the draft interim objective design standards and take you through a study session of those standards. SB 35 and SB 423, as mentioned earlier, require a streamlined ministerial approval process for jurisdictions that haven't made sufficient progress towards their RENA numbers. Half Moon Bay has been identified as one of those jurisdictions. So within Half Moon Bay, under SB 423, projects with a minimum of 10% affordability or a 20% moderate income option could qualify for SB 423 or streamlined ministerial approval. SB 423 specifically expands SB 35 provisions into the coastal zone. It will be effective January 1st, 2025, and these projects can also be generally referred to as streamlined ministerial approval as SMAP projects, which stands for Streamlined Ministerial Approval Process. It might make it a bit easier when discussing these projects. As we briefly touched on earlier, the applicable sites and areas that these projects could be in are specifically sites zoned for multifamily or multifamily mixed use. It could be permitted use or conditional use. I do want to correct the record. We sent out a checklist to all of you earlier that noted which specific zoning designations would qualify under this. And we did mark industrial in error. Multifamily use is not a permitted use in our industrial zoning designation. Areas where multifamily is a permitted use would be R2 family residential, R2 multifamily residential, R3, and then our commercial and commercial residential zoning designations would qualify. There are specific criteria that would preclude a project from being a qualifying project. That includes prime agricultural lands, being within the Coastal Commission's appeals jurisdiction, and so on. Here's the map you saw earlier. It's really just to come back to for reference if needed. So to reiterate, I'm sure we've all heard by now what objective design standards are, but they're a set of clearly defined and measurable standards that relate, in this case, specifically to design criteria. So we're looking tonight at just objective design standards. There could be a future process where we look at general objective standards, but that don't directly relate to design. So I just want to make that clarification as we're looking at these. This is simply looking at design criteria and site design. So to qualify for ministerial review, a project would have to meet all objective standards or objective design standards that are in place. Otherwise, a project would apply under discretionary review, which is our more standard process that we're familiar with. So, but in this case, as I mentioned, you have to qualify for objective standards. That includes our existing objective standards, which we have development standards throughout the various zoning designations, and those would all still apply and are not superseded by our objective design criteria. So as I mentioned, these projects would qualify for ministerial review. That means there's no discretionary review for qualifying SB 423 projects. So that's where the purpose of having these objective design standards in place really comes in. We won't have these kinds of meetings to review the criteria. It would be based solely on what we have in place. So far, we've begun this process back in August 2024, where we sent out a request for proposals and established the work scope, as well as went into contract with a consultant to help us develop these design standards. We have come to City Council on a couple occasions to provide briefings, but haven't had a formal study session with City Council yet. But we did have a study session with our Planning Commission back in November, where we received some additional feedback, which our consultants will touch on throughout their presentation, more specifically what feedback we received and how those have been incorporated where feasible in these interim design standards. Most recently, we briefed City Council at the December 3rd meeting, where we received that direction to bring forward interim objective design standards. So that's why we're here specifically tonight with these draft interim objective design standards. Based on that direction, we've worked quickly to move forward and bring forth what you had attached to the agenda packet today. It will be a set of temporary design standards, meaning we'll continue to work in 2025 towards final objective design standards. Tonight, we'll be looking for you to provide feedback and direction on these draft interim design standards for multifamily housing. Your feedback may consist of revisions you'd like to see made before adoption of these interim standards, as well as future feedback that you'd like to have considered in the final objective design standards. So keep in mind there are options to provide both of those types of feedback. You will have the option to consider a resolution for adopting the interim objective design standards tonight. In that case, some of the feedback, we would likely only be able to incorporate minor revisions for adoption tonight, or alternatively, there's an option to direct staff to notice a special meeting for December 23rd and bring forth revised interim objective standards. So if there's a bit more complex revisions that you'd like to see brought forth, that might be a better option. And then lastly, as I mentioned, you can provide feedback that you'd like to see, not necessarily in the interim standards, but on future final objective standards. I will introduce Dana Ayers. I apologize if I mispronounce her name, but she is here on behalf of MIG to walk you through the interim draft design standards.
Thank you, Okoye, and thank you members of the City Council, Planning Commission, and AAC. Is that better? Okay, thank you. So as Okoye mentioned, we're here this evening to discuss with you some of the interim ODS standards for multifamily residential development and mixed-use development. So I'll be going over some of the history. I know we have a couple new people who have joined the group this evening. And then we'll be going over the standards themselves and how we got to this point tonight. Next slide, please. So just as a reminder, I know this slide has been shared before. The ODS are applicable to a certain area within the city. It's not citywide. The areas that are identified on the map, both in Okoye's presentation as well as in the preceding presentation, are the areas that would be subject to, potentially subject to these interim ODS. So we had quite a bit of a process, as Okoye mentioned. We've been meeting with city staff as well as with various members of these bodies over the past few months. We've conducted our own site visits. We've reviewed existing policies, regulations, and standards in the code. We've also conducted site tours with members of your AAC as well as Planning Commission. And as Okoye mentioned, there was a meeting on November 12th with the Planning Commission and members of the AAC where we got additional feedback that fed into the draft standards. Next slide, please. So what we observed through our site visits to your downtown and through various neighbors that might be subject to these standards, there's a lot of history here, there's a lot of culture here, a lot of art, a lot of murals, a lot of sculptures. There's quite a bit of a historical presence as well. You have a lot of historic buildings, buildings that pay homage to historic structures that are no longer here. We also observed a variety and integration of various densities in existing single-family neighborhoods. So we saw mixes of single-family homes along with multifamily dwellings. Mixture of architectural styles. You can see on the screen here, we have a very contemporary library, which I know members of the community are very proud of, as you should be. It's a beautiful building. There's also buildings that give nods to historic structures, a lot of different architectural styles that are reflected. We did not really observe a single predominant style in our visits to the site, although we did observe repetition of certain building features. A lot of porches, again, a lot of art and a lot of artistic elements to buildings. Next slide, please. We also reviewed your existing development regulations. As Okoye mentioned, you have a zoning code and it has a lot of standards in it already. You have setbacks, you have lot coverage, you have a building envelope standard. All of those standards will remain in place with these objective design standards. The objective design standards would not change those standards. They would supplement them in order to create the appearance of the structure rather than changing the standards that you already have, which are very robust. It's also our objective to build on past efforts with respect to building design. So we took a lot of time to review your adopted single-family residential design guidelines, which are a little under 10 years old now. Part of the guidance that we got from the AAC and Planning Commission last month was to use this adopted document and, as I said, build off of these standards, turning some of these guidelines into standards that can then be applied to small lot multifamily developments, which I'll define a little bit later in the presentation. Can we back up a little bit? So some of those design guidelines that are already adopted deal with dropping articulation to multiple sides of the building, reducing massing on upper floors, incorporating a variety but not too much variety in roof forms, and pedestrian orientation and parking entrances, parking garages and parking stalls that are not in front of the property, as well as quite a few sustainable building and site design elements. Now, next slide, please. Thank you. We also conducted the tour, as Okoye mentioned. What we heard from members of the public as well as members of your AAC and Planning Commission who were in attendance at the tour was that there was not a single architectural style that was representative of the city's character. There was a preference for a single architectural style within a single development rather than a mixture of styles. A lot of emphasis on plane breaks and recessions. That's reflected in the design guidelines you already have. There was a preference stated for materials other than stucco, or stucco as a minor component. And again, articulation through eaves. There was a comment about one of the developments we visited had a lot of lively colors to it, mixing roof forms, and again, reiterating parking behind buildings so it's not a prominent feature of a development. Next slide, please. After that tour, we also got additional feedback from a subcommittee member who was not able to attend the tour. That specific comment or the information that we got from staff from that representative asked that we give consideration to the city's coastal location with an emphasis on what he termed a coastal contemporary style, that we balance asymmetrical elements and functional balconies of Half Moon Bay, and that was a very good example of a contemporary style. There was a preference for articulation over simpler buildings, and that this building seen here on the bottom of the screen here was a good example of multifamily design. Again, reiterating what we heard at that study session. So at that study session, we presented a set of preliminary draft standards, very, very rough at the time. We did get some feedback on some of the standards, but the biggest piece of feedback that we came away from that meeting with was a request to create 2 tiers of standards. One set of standard that dealt with what we call small lot single family, which is the comment at the time was 2 to 3. We actually recommend that be 2 to 4, with no more than 2 stories. And with those, the standards based on your single family design guidelines. And then the second component, or the second tier to that ODS document, was to then write design standards for developments with, again, the comment was 4 or more. We suggested be 5 or more, with a selection of architectural styles and related color palettes. And these were the 4 styles that were identified in that meeting as the preferred, or at the time stated dominant styles. Next slide, please. Following the November 12th AAC meeting, we got additional feedback from the subcommittee. They reaffirmed this 2-tiered approach using the single-family design guidelines turned into standards for the smaller lot models. We discussed using the ODS, having standards for gateways and transitional areas. And then the architectural styles question came up again. These were the styles that were selected and discussed as preferred during that meeting. Subsequent to that, we had another meeting with City Council, our first meeting actually with City Council staff, between staff and City Council, where there was a request for direction, which Okoye mentioned, where we are now looking at doing this as a 2-pronged approach with the first phase and second phase. And then there was another meeting last week to get additional subcommittee member feedback. Again, reiterating some of the feedback that we got in earlier drafts. Also, adding flexibility so as not to preclude certain architectural styles. And then at that meeting, there was also a style that was discussed for the modern farmhouse as a potential additional palette for larger multifamily projects. At this time, are there any questions that I can answer?
Why don't we do the same thing we did before? Anything from Architecture Advisory Committee?
Am I to assume that we would spend a few minutes tonight going through the details in this? Okay, then I don't have
Yes.
questions now.
Yes, so for this first component, we're just going through some background and getting everybody up to speed. So we all have the same information on what we discussed so far.
Okay, then I don't have questions now.
Thank you.
I'd just like to make a clarifying comment about the last subcommittee meeting. When we were talking about flexibility, it was really being applied to the smaller projects, so 4 units or below. It was very specific to that. We have an eclectic style of architecture, and we don't want to constrain people from being creative and thoughtful when it comes to smaller projects. I think the concern is we don't want to have as much flexibility for larger projects. We want to really define that or put some guardrails around that very clearly. And the reason why we had 5, then 4, then 1 that you've never heard of before was from the subcommittee discussion. This is for City Council. Just we're trying to figure out, is there a single standard that we can go with out of the gate that kind of gives something that we can all hang our hats on and feel good about to get started as an interim standard. And I think we laid down a marker of, hey, we got these 4 styles, they're kind of important, they're kind of interesting, but when we sit there, we're like, is that really, I mean, architectural feedback was, is that really who we are? And is that really where we want to hang our hat? And so I think thinking about the larger structures, the idea of farmhouse might be called American vernacular. That's actually an architectural style. It's like Sea Ranch is an example of American vernacular. You could argue that the library is an example of American vernacular as a style. And I think it's important that we talk about prominent architectural elements that incorporate our rural character. barn doors, local materials, things that have windows that give you more lighting so you don't get depressed. These are the kinds of things that American vernacular uses. They also have sloped roofs versus low-slung ranch-style roofs. That's what we're talking about here. Now, we don't want to necessarily debate a particular style. We were just asking, hey, is there something we can do to lay down a marker to get started so that we have something in place that gives a little more direction on January 1st?
Thanks for the background. Appreciate it. Council, any questions or comments before I move on?
Just a quick comment to that. I'm not in favor of barn-style architecture. You know?
Fair.
Okay, let's move on. Thanks. Thank you.
Okay, so creating the ODS, the interim ODS. We tried to ensure context, in drafting the interim ODS, we tried to ensure context-sensitive design standards, looking at what's here now and creating standards around what's here and what's been identified as design that was liked, building on those past planning and design efforts, and then prioritizing how buildings are experienced from the public realm, how somebody sees it from the sidewalk, from the street. We want to continue to foster the architectural interest in building variation that we observed in your community and encouraging creativity and flexibility, which I understand the clarification on that now. And we really wanted to make sure we incorporated stakeholder feedback. So throughout this presentation, I'm going to walk through, there are 8 different sections that deal with 8 different design elements in the ODS. I'll walk through them one by one, well, in clusters. And after each cluster, I want to have these touch points. And these are the questions that we'd like to clarify with the decision makers here this evening. Does the overall framework of the interim ODS work? Are we achieving the desired articulation? And what, if any, revisions or alternatives should we be considering now versus in a future phase? So as I go through the various sections, keep these questions in mind. I'm also delayed in introducing Mukul Malhotra, who is also on the call from MIG. He's participating by Zoom. He is also available to answer questions. Okay, so the interim ODS are organized into 8 sections, with each section dealing with, after the introductory chapter, each section deals with a different component of design, such as building, site, location, massing, orientation, roof treatments, landscaping. Similar to how your zoning code is written, each section starts with general standards that are applicable to all multifamily development types. And then they break down into small lot standards, which is the 2 to 4 lot type of development, and the large lot, which is 5 or more units. So starting with site layout and building orientation. A lot of the standards that came into this section came out of your single-family residential design guidelines, primarily orienting entrances toward public rights-of-way. We also observed this, Gregory Gardens, I think is the name of this one. The Gregory Gardens, which, Leslie Gardens. Okay. I know it was a name.
And what's the other picture, by the way, the picture on the bottom?
I don't remember the name of the development. This is here in town. It's one of your planned development areas.
Cypress Cove.
Thank you. So again, prioritizing access, orienting buildings toward street, or for a multifamily building, orienting at least one entrance toward a public street. With Leslie Gardens, you have a lot of buildings that don't have street frontage, so in those instances, prioritizing orienting those entrances toward a common open space. And then for large lot developments, pull the parking lots out of front setbacks. And I'll speak to parking a little bit more later as well. Next slide, please. On massing and articulation, I think this is where the bulk of the standards come in. So again, speaking to trying to provide some flexibility for designers to continue to let you have this eclectic design and continue to foster diversity in your architectural styles, we focused on providing a menu of options for compliance, for articulation. That menu includes functional balconies, projecting or recessed windows such as bay windows, materials changes, plane breaks, belly bands, which are those horizontal bands between floors, elevation breaks every 25 feet, which also comes from your single-family residential design guidelines. And then larger developments have a slightly larger menu of options to choose from, including additional window enhancements such as canvases and awnings, and murals. We also want to make sure we de-emphasize height. Slow down a little bit. And highlight commercial spaces. Now you can move on. So a couple of examples of how these might work. So these, the next few examples are not local, but they demonstrate how the standards could be visualized. So this is a multifamily development in East Bay area. With your standard to include at least 3 of the menu of options, this one includes 4. So you consider this is what you would potentially get from a menu of options like this. This building includes balconies. It has at least 2 materials and 2 colors. There are window boxes below each window as well as lintels above the top. And there are plane break changes every minimum 25 feet. The combination of materials also reflects your building materials that are in the interim ODS. Next slide, please. Okay. Second example, this is a different example of how your ODS might be interpreted and translated into a structure. Repeating the functional balconies, that was another comment we heard pretty clearly from subcommittee members, functional balconies rather than the Juliets. Canopies, awnings, or trellises, and at least 2 materials and colors. It's a little difficult to see, but there is vertical siding on the green part of the building as well as stucco on other parts. Next slide, please. For mixed-use buildings with residential components, we want to highlight the ground floor commercial uses by emphasizing height, using canopies or awnings, and in this instance, providing plane breaks at the storefront. So you can see that the door is slightly recessed on the storefront, as well as the window on the side of the building. So this is how potentially mixed-use development standards, ODS standards, might translate into 3 dimensions. Next slide, please. Okay. Just to reiterate before we get to the touch point 2, that one thing I wanted to clarify is some of the standards that are embedded in these articulation standards do come from your single-family design guidelines, wrapping articulation around to sides. The plane breaks, that 25-foot number comes from your residential design guidelines. There is in the draft standards a standard for smaller upper story footprints. And this is one that I wanted to mention to the group in particular because there was a request that we address transitions. That's potentially one way to do it. However, I would also acknowledge that that particular type of standard, while it would address a transition, would have precluded some of the construction that I've also heard that you liked. So the 433 Main Street, and there's a building on Mill, I don't know the name of it, but it is in the deck as well. So that's something that I think it would be helpful. I can pull this, it's a...
Yeah, it's 650 mil.
6. Yeah, so the image on the top, in the middle, on the left, does not have that sort of 80% transition setbacks. So as we're speaking to the touch points for this part of the presentation. I was hoping to get a little bit of feedback from the group on that and whether that's something you'd like to keep or if there are other ways that we can consider additional treatments, landscaping to address the transition areas. So again, do these overall interim ODS work? Is the desired articulation achieved through these standards, and what revisions or alternatives should be incorporated into this phase and future phases of the ODS? Any comments at this time?
I'll speak to some of that.
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
Your initial question, does the overall framework work? I think it does. I think you've done a good job on this, and I think that the visual presentation component of it helps a great deal. Regarding your comment about the articulation and then the 80% and so on, that I think the important element there is that in the next phase of refining these designs, we need to come up with a number of different building styles that cannot yet be defined in these interim standards. And at that point, you would have the differentiation between styles that would, as you showed with the building of Purisma, that doesn't have a setback and would not appropriately have one, but you would have that with a different architectural style of building. So the style definitions will clarify that. So I think you can leave what you've got now for the interim standards, but in relatively short amount of time that would get addressed through the details that we need to put together for a series of, let's call them palettes, from which designers and owners could select. What was your third question? At this point, I don't have significant revisions, but minor dimensional things that we could talk about if you want to go through the details before it's approved. And some typos.
Oh, okay. You can mention them now because I believe there is an option to adopt these tonight. So if there are things that can be clarified or cleaned up now, then is that appropriate?
Well, in that regard, do you have the actual document so that you can put it up in the way that it was presented in the...
Yeah, I can pull it up.
Okay.
Okay, good.
I would ask the mayor, would you like to take comments or questions from individuals? Do you have a preference? Or just one at a time? Would you?
Well, it's 20 to 10, so it depends how much into the weeds we want to get tonight versus another meeting.
Okay.
But if you're going to approve this, I mean, do you want to get in the weeds or just approve it as it's written?
Is it okay if we just go ahead and go through committee member Hooker's comments?
Make some comments.
There are only a few.
Yeah, please.
Yeah. Under massing and articulation, keep scrolling down, please, under massing and articulation. Keep going. Section, this is just numbers and it's all over the place. Please just keep scrolling. You'll get there in this document. Right there. You have a comment?
Well, we're right on, this is page 12, yeah. Up at the top, I think you touched on this a little earlier, that the item 5.7, any floor above the first floor shall be limited to 80% of the footprint of the first floor, and shall be stepped back at least an additional 4 feet. I think that's getting too picky, because some architectural styles will not work with that. And so forcing someone to do that in an architectural style where it doesn't make sense, I think you need to be maybe just get rid of that, but maybe find
Okay.
some other way of wording, but that doesn't work with all architectural styles at all. So I'd be worried about that. It could really mess something up.
Any other thoughts on that? Is there a reason why there's that limitation there?
Part of the request we got, some of the feedback we got from the subcommittee members was to deal with transitions. It was a suggested approach. I think your committee member is correct. It may not be the most appropriate, given that these interim ODS are style agnostic, I guess that's the right word, because they are not so specific to style and they are more generic. This may be a type of standard that you look at in the future phase to be considered as part of a particular palette or architectural style.
But not, right. Does anyone have any problem striking that for now?
I think the concern would, I think Linda's absolutely right that it would preclude certain architectural styles for objective design standards. If somebody had a style that they wanted to pursue, they could still pursue it. It just wouldn't be ministerial. So that's number one. And the example of the project on Mill Street is an example where under the current standard, if somebody wanted to bring another beautiful project like that forward, they could do it. It just wouldn't be ministerially approved. I think the concern about striking that language would be the purpose of it, and maybe it's 4 feet, maybe it's 2 feet, I don't know, is to prevent stack and pack type architecture. And that's one clear way to do it, is you take that off. You can't have this linear structure that looks like it was made by IKEA. Yeah, and it's an interim standard. We can always improve, we can add more pallets. I think in the short term, it's more of a preventative of, it's not perfect, I agree with you, and maybe it's 2 feet, I don't know. Maybe it's something that could be thought about, but that's the idea, is trying to prevent stack and pack type architecture with that language. And I'll defer to our architectural team on this, but that's the intent for now.
Is there also an objection to any floor above the first floor being limited to 80% of the first floor? Does that not work with architectural styles as well?
It does not.
It does not, okay. So it's not just the step back.
I would add to the comment, or to respond to the comment that was made, there are other options for plane breaks too, right? There are other articulation standards that would, there's an option for balconies, for example, that may create those plane breaks that are already in the document. So I think by taking it, I don't think you're necessarily going to get the IKEA cube, because there are other options for plane breaks.
Is this applied to buildings greater than 4 units, or?
Yes, this is the large lot prototype.
So again,
So I would concur with Linda that you strike that, and then we build that kind of a suggestion into a palette that would perhaps allow for contemporary construction. I think Rick's concern is that you get another 555 Kelly. It's just a box, but I think these standards will prevent that with other forms of plane breaks. Okoye, can you go to page 13, please? You've got a paragraph 13 there that begins windows and openings of non-residential use, and then paragraph 14 says the same thing, and then paragraph 15 says the same thing. 14 and 15 are 13 subdivided into different paragraphs. It seems very redundant to me and not clear. So that just needs a little minor editing.
Okay.
I think the note in 14 that the windows shall be transparent is the only real change from the way those paragraphs are put together. And to this plane break discussion, the photograph there is a good one.
The third one?
Yes.
So we can do the cleanup on,
If you can go to page 16, please, Okoye. There's a chart here of allowable building materials. Because,
can I
Yeah,
ask
I'm
you to
sorry.
hold that comment?
Okay.
And we're just focusing on chapters 2 and 3 for now.
Oh, okay.
And then we'll go on to building materials in the next,
Okay, I'm sorry.
that's okay.
So I think it's a very good comment, and we can take out the last two. I think the first 13, X111, incorporates both the follow-up, so the next two ones are redundant and can be taken out.
If there are no other comments, Mayor, shall we move on?
I just had one other comment, which is we don't have anything that I'm aware of within this. I didn't find anything, and we don't have anything that has a certain amount of natural light be allowed into buildings. One of the buildings, a lot of people here suffer from depression because of lack of natural light and the fact that it's often cloudy. So when we do get light, we want to make sure that we're allowing more natural light into the buildings. And the existing residential design guidelines don't really go into detail. They go a little bit, but for the larger structures, I'm worried we're going to have more housing like Main Street housing, like Moon Ridge, that is dark and low ceilinged. So if we can have something that's slightly higher ceiling heights for these types of housing, or have a minimum standard, there's nothing that's defined. And I know there exist in the world of architecture and design standards for a certain amount of natural lighting or standards for light. We should have those incorporated into this, especially for the larger. I don't want us to build housing that looks pretty on the inside, but it's not very pleasant it's pleasant on the outside, but not pleasant on the inside. Nothing's been addressed in these design guidelines for that.
So is that something we can address in a future phase?
I'd love to see if we could put something in, like give you direction and let you run with it, would be my suggestion. I wouldn't want to design it from here, but if.
So no taken on that. Great, we'll move on.
Through the mayor, can I ask a question?
Yeah.
Can we add design elements that comply with Title 24 to accommodate wheelchair-bound, hearing, and sight-impaired people? In other words, can we have objective design standards that include specific language that describe projects that have wheelchair-accessible entrances, wheelchair-accessible door width, open spaces with a minimum of a 5-foot turn radius, accessible kitchens that include lower storage spaces, ADA compliant appliances, lower countertops, and open space underneath sinks, accessible bathrooms, showers, grab rails, shower benches, stair lifts for townhomes, and wheelchair accessible closets, and then also outdoor spaces that include wood or concrete patios and deck areas. Could these be considered as part of objective design elements in the objective design standards?
If I could, through the mayor, the California Building Code and the federal codes for accessibility, ADA and ABA, all of those things are law, and any building anywhere has to comply with all of that. And it was my understanding that any of these projects, even though they're asking for all kinds of concessions, they cannot violate code.
Correct.
And so if they cannot violate code, they have to have that. Every single building everywhere has to have it. And they have to have all of the ADA and ABA standards. So a person that did 100% affordable, they can't say, well, I'm not doing that part.
But I think
have to
there's,
do it.
are there some standards that are, like the handrails, for example, can a portion of the units have those types of, they're not required for every project, I think is
Yeah, they are.
handrails?
Yes, yeah.
But
Well, any stair has to have, anything more than 2 risers has to have handrail.
For stairs, yeah.
Yeah, for
But
stairs.
what about accessible kitchens and bathrooms?
They have
and-
to have a certain percentage that is set by the accessibility codes.
Because we were advised that under super density bonus law, they could ask for concessions to not comply with these
That's not-
standards.
I don't believe that's true from what the city attorney has said.
Yeah, just to clarify, so waivers and concessions must be granted unless they cause public health or safety impacts. So that's the exception to sorry, not the super density bonus law, all density bonus law. A city does not need to, in fact, cannot grant a waiver or concession that would have a public health and safety impact. Generally speaking, and please planners and architects, correct me if I'm wrong, but building code standards are generally understood to be public health and safety standards.
However, I'm more concerned about not having enough units available in our city for handling, or for the physically impaired or seniors, for example. Not having units just with showers. Can we discuss a little bit about, can we ask developers or have a criteria in our resolution saying that, a certain number of your low income or moderate income houses should have at least 1 unit or 2 units that accommodate folks that are in wheelchairs. And it's not only ADA compliant, I'm talking about having a design for somebody that would want to rent a home, a unit that has the kitchens that are accommodating their wheelchair so that they can reach. Not all people have aids to help them. I have had 2 very good friends of mine that, were able-bodied and in their 30s and 40s developed ALS and MS, and they needed to have that kind of accommodations. It was very difficult for them to find apartment buildings for that. That accommodated them. So it's just something that I was thinking that is there a way we can incorporate, having units in our town that accommodates the elderly and the wheelchair bound or the people that, need designs in their units for that.
So I think the direction here is clear to start considering when, where, and how these accommodations would be applied. Multiple units, single homes, what does that look like? What are, in terms of the requirements under law as it exists? Especially for new especially for new projects, but in terms
I
of
guess
private
there
homes.
could be, this would be a question I would have, is whether in the ODS, could we increase the percentages over what is required by state and federal law? Because if you had, say, the retired farm worker housing, for example, you might want to have 50% of the units, or 75% of the units, or if it's senior housing, 100% of the units having to be accessible and adaptable. And if we could do that as part of the ODS, why not do it? I would think that we could require more than what's required by the code. Certainly in senior housing, you do that all the time. Everything has to be adjustable. But that's just good design practice.
Yeah, let's also figure out are we even meeting minimum standards generally before, and then figure out what are the opportunities to exceed it, especially stuff that hasn't been built yet, that's even more possible, so that makes sense.
We did ask for this with 555 Kelly, and we did not achieve, creating a certain percentage of units to accommodate seniors that might be disabled.
Which seems strange, if it's senior housing and how to accommodate seniors.
I'd like to speak to that a little, though. The excuse that they came up with on 555 Kelly for virtually everything we asked them to do was that they didn't have enough money in it, which is ludicrous on its face. But in any event, there's an important point there. If you did what Linda suggested and went to 80% or 100% requirement, it would make it more expensive to build. And I think it's important that in this whole discussion, we don't lose track of the larger objective here. State law has changed, and this city is working toward adopting it because the ultimate objective is more housing soon. So as much as we want to protect our town from outrageous development, and by outrageous, I mean very unattractive, we don't want to build big, ugly buildings, we need to develop standards here that are practical and can be implemented and will not make buildings so expensive that it's defeating our purpose. We do need more housing. I think there's agreement that we need more housing, so we need to be cautious about what we write if it's just going to make it too expensive to build.
I agree, it might cost a little bit more, but are we saying, in saying that, are we saying that our folks that are, not able-bodied don't deserve a little bit of attention? I'm concerned that we're building a lot of homes and houses that might not accommodate a lot of people that are not able-bodied. I mean, every one of us can have the unfortunate circumstance happen to us, and I would like to see us accommodate a little bit of it. We're all, the baby boomers are getting older, and a lot of us will need, places to live that we can actually reach into a closet or reach into, a cabinet, at the top. And I'm hoping that we can start changing our paradigm and not talk about cost all the time. I mean, there's some responsibilities that developers should also, host.
Hazel, that's a point well taken.
May I, Mayor?
Sorry?
May I?
Yeah, please.
So my suggestion would be that this be something that we look at in a future phase. For one, so that we can better understand what the current, as your AAC members have mentioned, there are standards already and requirements in building code already for accessibility, and I understand the desire is to consider some a potentially higher standard. I'd like to understand what those standards are more fully, so that we can give you a good number. I don't want to come up with a number right here in this room and say 25% or 50%, because it would seem rather arbitrary. Furthermore, the interim standards that we're looking at right now, that we're asking you to review this evening, have to do with how buildings are experienced from the outside. And when we start talking about rails and grab bars and lower cabinets, we're talking about the interiors of the units. So my suggestion would be, give us some time to see if there is a mechanism to address it through the ODS, but for now, let us prioritize the building exteriors.
Yeah, I think that makes sense for now, and we've got these other important considerations on the radar screen for next phases, so thank you.
I had one more comment, and then I'm done, if that's okay. We had a recommendation, we've talked about limiting the use of stucco. That came up as a recommendation, but I didn't see a specific amount of material for street-facing.
Can I ask you to hold that question?
Sure thing.
Okay, all right. So can we wrap up? Any more comments on building articulation and site layout? Okay.
I think we're ready to move, yeah,
Okay,
thanks.
great. So next sections. Building materials and colors. So this is why I asked you to hold your comment, Commissioner Hernandez, because we are talking about building materials and colors. Again, what we heard was, during the site tour, we heard, less stucco, more variety of materials. Again, we're trying to provide a menu of options for building material walls, as well as for roofing materials and fencing materials, and a requirement for at least 2 colors on the building exterior. We actually had a higher number before, but one of the specific items of feedback that we got was that it may be too constraining to have more than 2 as a requirement. So developers can do more, or for some architectural styles, 2 is fine. I will speak to your question now. Well, I'll wait until you ask your question, and then we'll talk about stucco. The table of optional building materials is in the ODS document, the interim draft ODS. There is, consistent with your single-family design guidelines, a limitation on the amount of stone that can be used on the exterior of a building, as well as a prohibition on any reflective materials. Entrances, windows and doors. Again, menu of options would include framing around windows and doors, projections or recessions for porches or trellises, awnings, decorative shutters on a certain percentage of windows, and application of a window style that's consistent with the building architectural style on all elevations. There was also a request to deal with some privacy. Specifically, there is a standard that deals with orientation of balconies and addition of textured bathroom windows to optimize privacy, and that comes from one of your single-family residential design guidelines that your subcommittee asked us to incorporate it as a standard. Roof treatments. The limitation of 3 roof forms on a single building also comes from your single-family design guidelines. Similarly, there was a comment made during the AAC site tour that, a lot of dimension can, just trying to balance architectural projections. Roofing material should be in the family of gray, brown, or terracotta colors, but allow lighter colors on roofs that are not visible from a public right-of-way. I believe we also got some comments on this, and we can speak to those if there are additional comments or questions on that particular standard. We also heard during the site tour that there's not a love for flat roofs by themselves, but they may be acceptable if they're integrated with a different roof style, which we've included here as a standard. But we've also included some options for how else you can dress up a roof that is flat by adding eaves, or by having plain breaks, or by having clear stories above the upper story windows and roof line to break up that block of wall, and different heights. And you can see that's what we're trying to depict on these 2 images. The upper one is a local image, the lower one is not. And then mansard roofs are prohibited. That was pretty loud and clear during the site tour. There was a specific building mentioned that has a mansard roof, so we took that to mean that that's not a roof type that's desired. Okay, another touch point. Does this overall framework work? Are we achieving the desired articulation? And what revisions or alternatives should we consider now or in a future phase?
Architectural advisory table.
If you could go back to page 16, please, Clay. This is the chart of roofing materials. You just mentioned that, I'm sorry. You just mentioned that flat roofs are certainly allowable in certain circumstances, but there's no roofing here that allows for that. Membrane roofing has to be on that list. And then several lines down from that, under fencing, vinyl fencing is, you've got this allowed as an accent, and I spent a few minutes trying to think about what a vinyl accent to a nice fence would possibly look like. I'm wondering why that's in there, what you have in mind.
The vinyl or vinyl accent?
Vinyl.
A vinyl?
Any vinyl material at all on a fence.
If I had a picture of my mom's house, I would show it to you. But it's, that's you see them, they're typically white panels. It's like a plastic material.
Right.
Did I not name it
A
correctly?
picture speaks 1,000 words, so it sounds like we need some graphics, maybe.
Well, I mean, I think we've all seen the vinyl fencing that they sell at Home Depot, and I don't think that's what we want. That's why I was surprised to see it on the list.
So that's not a desired material?
I think it's not.
Okay.
That's just my voice.
Okay. That's the kind of feedback we're looking for, so thank you.
Take it out.
Okay, sounds good.
And
Any more comments right now, or, all right?
I think the only thing that I had was just on the stucco as a material. Stucco is a cost-effective material. It's why people use it. My house has stucco. So I think for larger structures, it dominates the form and it's overwhelming. So for street facing, like especially like prominent street facing, I'd love to get architectural advisory's feedback on this, but maybe have a limit of 25% or no more than 50% of the material can be stucco for street facing.
Okay, so this is actually one that I was hoping would come up because, and it may be good to get some clarification as well. We did hear on the site tour that stucco was not a preferred material, and I think what I'm hearing is on a large scale. So the draft standards currently limit stucco to 60% of a building. However, we also got comments from your AAC members that stucco is appropriate on something like a Mediterranean-style building, and which would be 100% stucco. So this is one area where I think it would be good for us to have a little bit of discussion on what your preference is, whether you'd like to keep in a limitation or perhaps have a limitation on a street front-facing facade, or again, this may be something that is dealt with when we get to styles and for now is allowed, but at what percentage, I guess is the
I
question.
think your 60% number is a good number until we get to
For
styles
now.
in the next phase. And then, you know, a Mediterranean revival building would be 100% stucco, or nearly. Yeah.
So your suggestion is keep the 60% for now?
That's my suggestion, yes.
And not revisit the number in the future phase?
Yes.
Good. And it would seem how the
Yes.
stucco is colored makes a difference too in terms of overwhelming or so.
And it can,
Paint.
and you
Yep.
can have different textures of stucco. So I think it's something that for now we could leave in. I think there's some, ultimate discussion about saying, well, you can only have a certain percentage of stucco on one side of the house and then of the building, and then it gets weird because it changes. So I think that can be developed later, the detail on that.
But I think the 60%, would that only apply to structures larger than 4 units? Or would it apply to?
In this instance, no, there's not a differentiation between large and small.
I'd say I'm more concerned about it for larger structures versus smaller structures. A 2-story, single-family residence with stucco that's in a Mediterranean style, I don't think there's any issue with that being 100% stucco or whatever, mostly stucco. We're trying to prevent some of the ghastly structures that we've seen that are, all stucco and nothing else. That's where we're going. The 60% with those larger structures, I think, would kind of get the intent.
So for this iteration, possibly what I'm hearing is that for this iteration, there is a different standard for stucco for large lot that is 60%, that's unlimited for small lot, and then is revisited later.
So I think we do have a standard right now that says for buildings taller than 2 stories, that's where the 60% applies. The use of stucco shall not exceed beyond 60% of any exterior building wall that faces a street or common open space.
Is that adequate as it's written? Yes.
Great.
Okay, so no change
But
then.
don't torture single-family homes and units less than, 4 or less. Just for
right.
larger structures. That's what we're saying.
Okay.
So we can just say for buildings more than 4 units, the use of stucco shall not exceed 60%. So instead of saying 2 stories, we can say, because our definition for smaller lot development is 4 units, so that would replace for buildings more than 4 units.
Yeah.
We can make that change.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks for the comments.
Okay. We can move on. There's a lot going on. 25. Okay, all right, last one, or last cluster. Off-street parking, garages, and carports. You're drawing from your single-family design guidelines, there is a preference of de-emphasizing garages. So we suggested a standard that for a garage that is within 50 feet of a public right-of-way, there's additional treatment that needs to happen. If a garage is set at the back of the property, I think there's less of an emphasis that's less experienced from the public realm, so we didn't develop a standard for something that's further away. It also kind of becomes an incentive for putting it further away. Limiting garage doors to no more than 30% of the length of a building's street elevation. Again, this comes from a single-family design guideline that's intended to reduce the prominence of a garage door experienced from the public right-of-way. We did also get a comment on this, so if there is some additional feedback or revision to this standard, please do share. We developed a standard or recommended a standard for reducing the surface parking area for this in the front setback for a small lot development. So that's 400 square feet, which is roughly the size of a 2-car garage. Most people are accustomed to seeing a 2-car garage in front of a single-family type home. So we developed a standard that's similar to that. But for larger lots, we prohibited parking within the front setback and require screening. And then for the garages, for small lots, garages must be set back from the front wall of the building or side-loaded as is depicted in the picture here. Next slide. Landscaping design, we pulled forward a standard, well, we wrote a standard based on your single-family design guidelines to prioritize native plants by requiring that at least a certain percentage of plants in a landscape plan be native. The remaining can be non-native, non-invasive. Design landscaping to reduce irrigation demand in accordance with state law, as well as to promote energy needs. And so what we suggested was that any trees that are planted within 10 feet of a south-facing elevation be deciduous so that they allow light to come through, and to warm the buildings for passive warming in winter months and passive shading and cooling in summer months. Requiring street trees at 30 max on center. This actually is consistent with your subdivision standards. Multifamily developments are not subject to subdivision because they are not subdivisions unless they're condos. So we developed a standard that pulls forward your code. And then requiring shrub plantings to screen light and glare from parking stalls. Next slide, please. And then lastly, just other site and building features, ensuring that we have standards to ensure that development aesthetics and views are preserved through screening and placement of design and site accessories, and then allowing for sustainable utility strategies. We also have standards for mailboxes. This is sort of the catch-all everything else, including signage, consistent with your sign code. Okay, last touch point. Does the overall framework work? Does the overall framework work? And are we achieving the desired articulation? And what revisions or alternatives should be incorporated in this phase versus a future phase of the ODS?
I just had a couple of comments. On the, I'm looking on page 30, large lot development standards, C, parking spaces adjacent to a landscaped planter within a surface parking lot shall have a minimum 12-inch width curb. With the size of planters in a parking lot, you get 6-inch wide curb on each side, and there's no room for landscaping. So I'd watch that carefully.
Do you want to do you suggest taking it out?
Take it out.
I would think we could take it out. I mean, it's something that could be worked on later. Okay. In terms of real design standards, but functionally, yes, it would be nice to step out on a concrete curb when you're getting out of the car, but it's going to take up the entire planter. So I think that's kind of a design issue. And then on the other site and building features with utilities and mechanical equipment, I don't know if there's anything that needs to be put in here now, but I think we have to bear in mind that there are various agencies that will not let you mess with this very much. And I'm just thinking of the fire department connection that is on the Tin Palace. And I think a lot of people got a kick out of that, but it's just horrendous. And so the fire department is going to have certain requirements, and there isn't anything you can do about it. So we might have to massage some of this in terms of where mechanical and fire protection and what PG&E is going to require in terms of their transformers and those types of things. Design standards really can't affect that. I mean, you can try to tell those agencies where to put things, but often you can't have control. But it's just something we could take a look at later as part of.
I think the way you have that written can be left that way because when, again, these are design standards, so the designer tries to put bushes and barricades around things that need to be concealed and so on. And if at some point PG&E says you can't put that next to our transformer, that's when it gets deleted. But I think to leave it in the design standards keeps it in the aesthetic realm, which is what we're after here. So I think you should leave that. Do you have other comments? No. Okay. Okoye, if you could go to page 26, please. Paragraph 4, IV says, this is a sentence I've looked at several times and I can't make any sense of it. Parking areas shall be designed to provide direct and separate pedestrian and handicapped access from all buildings to the parking areas. And I can't figure out what that means. Direct and separate for handicap and pedestrian.
It could be, this may be something that could be dealt with just through Title 24 compliance, which requires striping between accessible stalls and building pathways. So if there's a preference to just comply with Title 24 standards, we could
Yeah, that could be a reference to Title 24. That'd be a good way to do it. It says below that walkways with district paving. I think that's supposed to say distinct. In any event, I got something else I wanted to cover here.
Sure.
Oh, to the utilities, a sore point with me is these hideous apparati that the water district installs now. They're sticking out of the ground all over town, and every time there's a project, there's more of them. They're above ground detector checks, backflow prevention devices. And I think they should be on the list of things that ideally a designer would put behind a bush or a screen or a wall or something, because they're really atrocious. I know they need to be above ground so they can be serviced, but they're uglier than transformers, and we talk about transformers here. This is in general standards on page 33, I think it is. 32, yes.
On that same paragraph, did you mean walkways with district paving or distinct?
distinct.
Oh, was that? Oh, okay. Clarified that already. Sorry. Okay, just make sure.
And then on page 33, there's a photograph of some sort of a screen hiding an air conditioner or something, and it says that it's a size. The cat.
That's also a typo, yes. It's thank you for catching that. We'll correct that.
Okay, I'm done.
So just to repeat your comment, because I don't think it was heard, there's a typo on the photograph of page 33, which we will correct. It was a repeat of a description of a different picture. We'll correct that. And then your comment was about backflow prevention valves and screening for backflow preventers.
Yes.
To the chair or mayor, I called, because that came up at the planning commission meeting, and Margaret brought it up, those things for the water, and you're saying how ugly they were, and so I called the city about that, or the water district, and I asked Dave Cosgrove too about it, Cosgrove, and that's something that's required, and they can't change that, so that's the answer I got, because my neighbor actually who lives down the street from me works there, and then I called her, then she sent me off to somebody else, so I asked about that question, because that came up on design. Apparently, you can't move it.
I think the comment was not about moving it, but about screening it with landscaping.
Yes, putting it on this list of things that ought to be concealed if there's a way to conceal them.
We're working with the water district to come up with a different standard so that we don't have to just eat what they give us.
Yeah, that's good. I mean, you know, picture downtown Burlingame. You wouldn't see those things sticking out of the ground all over the place. You wouldn't see that cluster on the front of the Pasta Moon building either, or Tin Palace, I mean. It wouldn't be there, so, or in San Francisco. I think you're correct. They can't be deleted, and you don't move them way to the back of the property, but we could do something to make them less obtrusive.
I like Rick's idea. Let's try to make it move, but I get it.
Done with section 7 is one question. Is there one more section?
Oh, Mr. Mayor.
That's the end of my presentation.
Okay, so,
But there
yeah,
are,
before.
there are others from this cluster.
Yeah, we've had someone's hand raised, Dan Haggerty, for quite a while, so I'd like to give him a
Through the
chance to
mayor,
comment.
there's a request.
Could I ask one last question on
Yeah.
this section, please? On
Hang on, Dan.
page 25, I'm trying to understand the limit on garage doors to be no wider than 30% of the building width, and I understand that that's an aesthetic goal, would be nice, but is that practical? I'm trying to work out in my mind what sort of the minimum width of the building might be, and is 30% of that going to accommodate a garage door in every case?
So this is actually one that I mentioned. We got some different direction. The standard initially came from your single-family residential design guidelines to reduce the prominence of garage doors, but we did get some different direction or different feedback from one of your AAC members that it may be too constraining. A one-car garage door is generally about 10 feet wide, so you can consider that a building that's roughly 30 feet wide, that would be the proportion. 30 to 35 feet wide. If there's comfort with a larger percentage, that's fine. We can certainly talk about that. That was where the standard came from, was trying to come up with a standard that incorporates that design guideline. So again, how you choose to massage that or change it, we can revise that standard if there's a comfort level with a larger percentage. Or some other standard that's maybe based on width of the garage door relative to the lot width as opposed to the building width. That's another possible way to look at it.
I imagine there would not be many buildings that would be narrower than 35 feet. So maybe that number is okay.
It depends.
I just want to make sure that it's practical.
Yeah, I wondered about that as well, because you could end up with a smaller, maybe a 4-unit building that's on a 50-foot wide lot. And by the time you take your setbacks and you get the front door in there, you can't restrict the garage door to 30%. It's not going to work. So maybe it's a way, maybe it gets worked out later, but if the statement can be a little more fuzzy in terms of don't emphasize the garage door. I think we say that quite often, in that the garage door shouldn't be emphasized, but putting a percentage on it when you don't know how wide the lot's going to be and how wide the building is going to be, it's going to.
I think there's a number of considerations I will have to, to bring up later.
Yeah,
one
I
is
would think so too.
less cars in the garage, more on the street.
Yeah,
Sometimes you can,
right.
one big garage door can be separated into
Right.
more aesthetic 2 or 3. So I
Yeah.
think we should just have it again on the radar screen to discuss what that aesthetic looks like and what are the consequences either way, and in terms of what's practical and feasible.
And I had just one more, one more thing. Although I think this isn't part of the standards itself, but that graphic that shows where these projects can go, and in the packet, it was black and white, but then when you showed on the screen, it was in color, so you could tell which heights were in which area. I think that's an important document for at least to give to all of us, so that we have a better sense of that, or maybe there's a way to also put it in the ODC, because, whatever, ODS, sorry, because that made a big difference to me when I saw it in color, so I could see where the height differences were. So that was my last comment, thank you.
And staff could accommodate that. I think we could even post it on, we have a web page for the objective design standards, so we could post it there to be available to the public.
I have one further comment in the landscaping section. If street trees wind up in a sidewalk, there should be tree grates. And you had tree grates in your original list of specification questions that you sent to us, but they appear to have been deleted from this portion of the landscaping portion of this. I think they should be iron tree grates. Our sidewalks in Half Moon Bay are narrow, and tree wells can be relatively large. And if there are tree grates, you're only walking around the tree. But if there are no tree grates, you're walking around a lot of other stuff, a mess.
So I would request us to keep in mind that over a period of time, experience has shown that tree grates, as the roots expand, they trip, the tree grates become unstable. We can use other materials like decomposed granite to create a more walkable surface around the trees, while still allowing for air and water benefits to go around the tree roots without and that also then helps reduce chances of upheaving the surrounding sidewalk. So the more area we give right now to the tree without the tree grate, the greater ability it has to grow and not upheave the adjoining sidewalk.
Just as a side comment, there's been a conversation with the city for more than 15 years about establishing standards for trees with root barriers and so on, because so many of the sidewalks are heaved. And there is still no city standard for that. So, and we're still not allowed to put rebar on sidewalks, so they get heaved. And that's what heaves the grates as well. In narrower sidewalks, though, I think tree grates really help. They help the pedestrians until they get heaved. So you need root barriers.
Okay.
Could I request a 2-minute break?
I beg your pardon?
2-minute break.
I'd love to have, Dan's been waiting a long time. Could we wait till Dan and then take the break? Dan, you're up. Sorry for the delay. We just have to unmute Dan.
Thank you. I got it. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
So much has been covered, and I'm going to do my very best to kind of go through some things, and I'm not gonna get them all. First of all, I want to say, hey, thank you for the outgoing and the incoming. Fundamentally, on the housing element, I wanted to say, the state too often has a one-size-fit-all policy, and in the end of the day, really, it's up to the locals to defend. If it fits our community at the end, and I've heard a lot of flavor from the council tonight, and the sorry, light went out. The planning commission. So I think everybody understands that. how everything fits is very important. It's important to know that the coast side is not similar to other high transit communities. Fundamentally, we need to understand that. We are not the Bayside. We are not the same. I have a concern with the destruction of the overall small town character of our community. And I know a lot of you guys here in the room agree. This is all important. I've got concerns with the density bonus laws. The RANA numbers have been contested by the State Finance Committee. And I've never heard from anybody any acknowledgement of that. These whole density bonus laws are very concerning to me because the state housing says that, okay, we've got this graph that goes up and we're going to have so many people, but the finance department says no, our growth is flat. So I'd like to hear, and I'll talk to you individually, your thoughts on that. The whole concept of the tsunami scare that came up recently has exposed that there's certainly an evacuation failure. So how many more beds do we want to put in, and how many more people do we want to force to evacuate? There's not only a tsunami. There could be a fire. There could be other, situations. So don't limit it to the tsunami.
Hey, Dan?
Yes?
We're...
I'm almost done.
Okay, if you can wrap it up and...
Do you want me to hurry?
That'd be
Do you want me
great.
to hurry up?
And by the way, there's a whole session on the tsunami, a public session, right? This Thursday night.
I've gone through it. I'm not going to
Just
say
saying.
anything more about tsunami. And then I want to object to the concept of the contemporary versus and the modern style. It just, in my opinion, it unfairly contrasts to the majority of the existing, and to the majority of the as visitors come, they just. I'm going to back it up to the whole.
So Dan, I'm really sorry, but got a lot of folks here, and we have to take a break.
I know,
So
but there was so much discussed. There was so much discussed.
So Dan, we're gonna
fundamentally that it's not proper to. You got one person that wants to say something. It's not proper to have so much discussion and then just cut it off.
Sorry, Dan, we're gonna have to stop. We're gonna have to cut you here because we gotta keep moving on. But I really appreciate your comments, and I'm glad you'll be getting back to other people individually. So thanks for that. Okay, we're going to take a break. A few minutes. Yes. So 2 minutes, 2 to 5 minutes. Okay. So, what do we need here? I know.
Oh, sure.
So what do we need to wrap up from us, the assembled group here?
So I think staff was proactive. We had a few conversations, and the sense is that if the comfort level exists here, the changes were minor enough that we think we could simply list out the changes to you, ensure they're correct, and adopt tonight.
I'm good with that.
And I'll just say that's quite a spectacular feat. It just shows great collaboration amongst these groups, and I'll also, great preparation by staff to put us in a position to be doing that. So
I think everybody did a fantastic job.
yeah, this was a pretty incredible session.
Linda and I agree with that as well.
Okay, so I don't know if you heard that, Okoye, but there's agreement here that the number and the type of changes that have been requested tonight are, and I had a quick chat with Steve while you were talking earlier, so I apologize, but they're such that if we can kind of feed back quickly to the group the changes that they've requested, and as long as it's clear and they're in agreement, that we can adopt tonight and then make those changes in the documents. So are you prepared to do that?
If we could have like 2 more minutes so I can write this up, I could present it on the
Sure.
board for everyone
that-
to see and
Would be-
verify.
okay. That would be
So
great.
I have a quick question for the group then while you're doing that.
Okay.
Given that this is the first of what is likely more sessions to really refine these, does this setup, this format work for everybody? Are there changes that you would request we make just physically to the room or how we manage this?
Well, it worked great today. Everyone's here. It's always nice when everyone's hearing the same thing. We're getting feedback from all the groups.
The horseshoe is a great format.
Well, it's sort of like a circle because we have staff here, so it really worked out well. I like this.
Whoops. And the wonderful presentations you made really helped facilitate that. So really can't underestimate. So thank you so much.
If I can make a comment, it's come a long way since that night of picking out color palettes, because you guys have come a long way. Remember that meeting? It was straight to colors, and now we've got actual structures and how we want it looking.
While Okoye is working on that, I'd like to say that I gave a lot of thought to the next phase of this, because it's apparent from these interim design standards that a key word there is interim. And I made some notes, and I might just as well read from that rather than try to be spontaneous here. I think that the AAC can move forward from here with input from staff, and perhaps, if you want to extend the contract, with help from MIG. I'm not certain we would need that in the initial phases. I'm thinking that the next thing to do is come up with palettes, several design palettes from which the project owners and designers can select. And palettes might include coastal craftsmen and Spanish or Mediterranean revival, mission revival, perhaps Art Deco. There's some of that in our commercial district and with our schools, but I don't know if it would be appropriate to multifamily housing, classical revival styles, and we could work on specific architectural details that would have to do with eaves and brackets and cornices and parapets and facades, window shapes and styles, roofing. A lot of those details could be appended to each of those palettes. And it would give us relatively good control over not just having a random hodgepodge of architectural pieces put together. And at the same time, the added guidelines would mean that projects that get submitted for administrative review, if that's what it's called, would not just be a series of checked off boxes, but rather some architectural components that make appropriate and desirable architectural outcomes would be what we would be after. And I think an important piece of that is to amend the standards so that you're not only creating interesting standards that aren't just checklist compliant, but these standards get expressed with photographs and so on, like we have in the interim standards, but with, you know, detail examples. Do this and don't do that, and a whole lot of perhaps drawings, perhaps photographs. You know, we all want to prevent the construction of ugly or inappropriate designs, and that's really our purpose. But the guidelines need to be carefully crafted so they can be artfully applied. And I think AAC would be the next step on that with whomever else wants to get into that loop. And it would certainly be up to council and city staff whether you need to hire outside help for that as well, to prepare the document for the next phase of approval. That would have to be written up, but whether that help is necessary through the entire sort of design argument phase, I couldn't speak to that, but it's probably not, and it could get very expensive. It'd take a lot of hours. This is a commitment of a lot of time. The other thing is that the final design guidelines need to be easy to use for the designers and for the city. The review process should be fluid and aimed at clear outcomes in a timely fashion. Obstruction or delay is the opposite of the intent here. We need these guidelines to help us get more and better housing outcomes. The sooner the better. Rick likes it.
Thank you.
If we get really, really specific about design elements, does that tie down somebody who's a developer to the point where they might say, look, I'm sorry, I think your designs are all lovely, but I can't afford to do them? Are we putting ourselves in a position where we're asking more of a contractor or a developer than they're able to do? I don't know the answer to that. I'm just wondering.
Well, as an example of that, let's take the project at 433 Kelly that's been brought up several times in this process. The front building is a Spanish Revival style, and the building that's behind it that faces the old Review building is more Craftsman style and in completely different materials. They're both multifamily housing and mixed commercial multifamily housing buildings. And you couldn't take parts of one and put it on the other and have it look right. You need the architectural style of the coastal craftsman thing defined by certain elements. That doesn't mean that somebody has to build in that style or in a Mission Revival style, but if they're going to go in the direction of a Mission Revival style, here are key elements that make the composition work artfully. And I think that's the series of additional suggestions we need to come up with for the next phase of this, to take it from interim standards to something that more thoroughly addresses the aesthetic element we're trying to accomplish. I don't think we demand that somebody spend a ton of money, and anything you do in Mediterranean has to have bronze handrails. I don't think that's realistic. This is multifamily housing, and we're trying to accomplish more housing, but we're trying to prevent ugly boxes. And the work that's been done with speaking to articulation and, offsets, window styles, how roofs work, all that will help a great deal in preventing the ugly box. But we could develop those standards further with architectural palettes from which a designer could select.
If I could just build on that, it's an important point, and I think at the end of what Chad said was, we're not trying to obstruct people. If anything, we want to make it simpler and easier for people to build quality housing that establishes the character. And I think the two-tiered structure of 4 units and less, we're taking the residential design guidelines that have been thoroughly vetted. They've been in place for nearly 10 years. They had a multi-year review process that started when Patrick was on so kicked off when Patrick was still on the Planning Commission. And so I think that that's really good. For the larger structures, we're not trying to obstruct. We're trying to just get stuff that, I don't think we're getting to that point. I mean, the things that make affordable housing unaffordable is the fact that we're building to a 50-year standard that's maintenance-free, which is a whole separate topic. That's why it's so expensive. But it's not because of these types of materials.
Yeah, and I just want to point out too that, we've seen some nice photos of attractive, affordable housing and market rate housing. And I think the cities and jurisdictions that ask for aesthetically pleasing design, they get it. If you don't ask for it, you don't get it. For one thing, you'd have, like Santa Monica or Pasadena, they ask for it, they get it. You have to have the design standards. But I think Deborah pointed up something that I think is a little bit of concern to me. This is a separate topic that I think we need to deal with at some point. But, there's this thing, in SB 423 that, the developer can say, well, in order to make this pencil out for me and more financially attractive, I need waivers on this or waivers on that. And my position is, I don't think we should just accept on the face of it them saying that this is too expensive for me or it doesn't pencil out. I think we need a way to evaluate whether or not it pencils out, from our side, rather than just accepting their claim that, oh, this is going to make it financially infeasible for me to build. I don't think we should just accept that. I think we need a process. Maybe it's having somebody on retainer to evaluate the economics, because I think that's a place where we could really get into, a slippery slope by just saying, okay, build a box because it's more financially feasible. So I think we want a separate check on that, a separate process and a check so that, we just can't get a snow job about it'll render it financially infeasible. So just something to think about in the future. So.
Deb, to your point about your concern about whether we would be constraining people, I don't think clarity means constraint. I think it means clarity of purpose and when they go into the design. And knowing what alternatives are available to them, both in terms of separate palettes and then within a palette, specific items they could use. And, doing it in one round is a lot easier and less expensive than this sort of back and forth with, AAC and people going, well, why don't you think about doing this? And why don't you change that? And that's where the money is, in the design end of it. It takes a lot of time. And we want to streamline it. So I think clarity is what we're after.
Yeah, I think in principle, I agree with you. I'm just not so sure that there aren't going to be, that you aren't constraining. I don't know what you're going to come up with, right? I mean, you say you're going to come up with some. I want it to be broad enough, to be open enough, flexible enough, so that a developer can come in and say, well, this is what I can do, and you're telling me what you need to be done, and how can we work together and make it work? Because I want to see housing built. And no, I don't want boxes. Obviously, I'm an artist. I don't want that. But I also don't want to stop the process because our demands are so restrictive that a developer can't come in and work with us. That's all I'm saying.
Well, keep in mind the way the standards that it looks like we will approve tonight, that keep in mind the way those are written, that there are a list of qualities and items, and you need to do one of these 4 or 2 of these 6. Here's a whole palette. Here's a whole design element within this particular palette. Look at these items and figure out how to make this building look artistically and architecturally complete with the right use of these. And it doesn't add an awful lot of expense. That's not where the money is. It's really not.
To be continued. Appreciate the dialogue. And I have a lot of things to say and think about that, but it is just about 11 o'clock. We'd like to get to our resolution, which I think is being finished. How are we doing? I'm back there on our, okay.
Mr. Mayor, maybe Catherine's been working on the language relating to the transit stop. Maybe we can cover that first.
Yeah, great.
I'm happy to read it. Thank you. I was able to be more articulate with the additional time. I did send a Word document to you, Akoi. I know you're dealing with the the details, but if you have a moment to pull it up on the screen, that would be great, and then we can just all look at it. I would suggest adding one recital as background, and then one new, now therefore, be it resolved sentence.
Let's have it.
I'll just read it, and then you can pull it up. Okay, so the new recital would read, whereas AB 2553, which is effective January 1, 2025, modifies the definition of, quote, major transit stop as including the intersection of two or more major bus routes with a frequency of service interval of 20 minutes or less during peak commute periods, comma, and does not include on-demand transit to achieve that frequency of service. So that's the new recital. And then the, oh, there it is. If you could just make it bigger, that would be great. And then the new, the second part of the resolution would read, now therefore be it further resolved that consistent with applicable state statutory definitions, the city will not use on-demand transit to qualify a location as a, quote, major transit stop unless directed otherwise by state law.
Council, any other problems with that? Can you put that back up? I'm happy to make that motion now.
I think you could wait for the additional changes to the attachment to the resolution, and then this language could be incorporated in the motion.
We're ready to bring up
Yeah.
So what we're saying, without saying it, we don't have a major transit stop.
Under
Half Moon Bay does not.
Under the current law.
Currently, Half Moon
and
Bay
under
does
the
not have a
current-
major transit.
If we did an analysis as of right now, yeah, we do not have a major transit stop.
Okay.
Are we good to move? Okay, I just wanted to make sure. In front of you, staff has written up what we believe to encompass all the minor revisions that we wanted to address within the interim objective design standards. We do acknowledge we have notes on future revisions that have also been noted. Here, we're just going to show what we would be revising with the current interim objective design standards. If you want to follow along, we also went ahead and noted the page numbers. So the first item would be to strike what you're seeing here on page 12. Apologize, I can't share both this screen and the standards, so you'll have to look at them as we go along. Sure. Would it help you guys if we read through these just to refresh our memory directly, or? No? Just, okay, trust me.
I think Matthew suggested that we send them to everybody, and then if anyone, is that what I heard earlier, Matthew?
No, I think just for efficiency, I think them just sharing it, but I do think it would help to at least provide some frame of reference of what it is we're striking.
Okoye, I can do that. I've got the
There you
document
go.
here in front of me if you want me to reflect on what these numbers mean.
Oh, yeah, that'd be helpful.
Okay, so that first one, on page 12, is the comment about the first floor being limited to 80% of the, any floor above the first floor, the 80% limitation. And this means that we would strike that requirement. And then page 13.
The second two is where we had some duplication of standards.
Yeah, about window openings and so on. That's
Yeah, so it won't actually be changing the standards that are in the interim draft design standards. It'll just remove the duplicate standards that are addressed.
Typo there. The vinyl fencing thing is pretty self-explanatory.
Yeah, you'll see there's several revisions within table 1, so I can summarize those all together. We'll be striking the vinyl fencing under fencing material to make sure this aligns with other areas of the document. We'd also be revising a standard later in the document to read specifically use of chain link fence and barbed wire is prohibited. Vinyl and plastic fencing materials are prohibited. So we'd just be removing this unless statement.
Okay, but before you move on from that chart, I brought this up at the last meeting and again tonight. The roofing materials that are allowed are comp tile and standing seam metal, but there's no membrane roofing permitted.
Yeah,
Is
we
that
have
in
that
there?
as well under
that in
table
there?
1,
I'm
add
sorry.
membrane roofing under roof material.
Okay, good.
One other revision to that same table would be to the footnote, to footnote B. We would be striking for buildings taller than 2 stories and would add for large lot development, the use of stucco shall not exceed 60%, and so on. We'd be striking through on page 26 where it says parking areas shall be designed to provide direct and separate. We'd strike that out and update it to state to comply with Title 24 standards.
And fixing the word distinct from district. Got
Yes. And then lastly, another revision on page 26. If anyone has.
I have a question to Chad about the membrane roofing.
Yes.
Like TPO is like horrible looking. Would that be included in here, like white TPO roof?
Well, it wouldn't be exposed. Membrane roofing, TPO would not be something you'd see, but this is a list of allowable building materials. And there's no provision for any flat roofing material there, so that's why I was saying it better be in the
The reason I'm saying is sometimes, like at our cabin, we put TPO on the sides, and it looks horrible when I go up the street and I look down, I go, it's white, and it's horrible. And Todd Donner is big into like, everything should be brown and certain colors. So I worry about TPO where you could see it, if it is TPO.
I think with the parapet requirements, I think with the requirements in these standards to have parapets around a roof, you wouldn't see it. Certainly with a large building development, you wouldn't. But I'm trying to picture how a designer working on a building would put a flat roof on it if that kind of, if some kind of material.
There's a building next to our shop that's got, you know, the old style Kwanzaa hut. You could see the TPO, it looks horrible.
Yeah. I don't think we're going to wind up with that building here. We don't want that.
Could a footnote be added to that says that they can't be visible from the street? Something along those lines?
That's a good idea.
Yeah.
Can you repeat that just so we can hear it all together?
The comment about adding membrane roofing. Membrane roofing should not be visible from the street.
Good example is the Oddfellow building. If you look out to the left side, it's got TPO, or it's not very desirable looking. But that makes it tricky. Then we're getting really detailed here.
When you get to a flat roof, I mean, it's not pretty. Flat roofs aren't pretty.
Can't you just say only use it where it's not going to be exposed to view? Yeah.
It's pretty hard. Membrane roofs need to roll up the inside of walls, and you're making a swimming pool. And they aren't pretty. And then they're littered with air conditioners, and they're not pretty. But you need to do those on large buildings. Otherwise, you stick a gable on them and you add to the height.
My only concern by adding something like should not be visible from the public right of way, there can be a lot of gray area, there can be trees in front or something else where the applicant can make a illogical way of expressing, and it's very difficult for the staff to measure that.
So you're suggesting there should not be a standard like that?
I'm totally with you all that it is very ugly, but I think it should be said it in some other way, that it should not be exposed or something like that, as opposed to where we start saying it should not be visible from the public right of way.
I mean, I see two paths forward here for the sake of getting this completed tonight. Either we include it and then address it more further in the additional work we're going to do here, or we don't include it and we address it further. And, I think that's the choice we have. The level of detail we're getting should be included in the future iterations of this. The question is, should we include it now or exclude it now?
I think since we're making a list of allowable building materials, that, for practicality, it has to be in there.
Yeah.
But we've noted that we'll look at ways to address that in the more refined standards.
Yes.
So can I verify that staff heard that correctly? We will be adding the membrane roofing into table 1, but we will look into revising the footnote in the future to further clarify that objectively.
Yes.
Or language like should be designed in a way to provide the least amount of exposure as possible, and then we can still argue about it later. It's as vague as it's as vague as anything. I didn't say that, never mind. So can we move on? What did we decide?
It sounds like there's concurrence to include it and then address it in more detail later.
Okay, great. Thanks. Okay, are we ready now? Or is that, we went through everything?
There was 2 left
Okay.
On page 30.
I can't find these things on page 30. I don't know what these are.
One of the areas is to add an additional bullet or number to add that tree wells shall have decomposed granite surface and root barriers.
Great.
And then the other one to strike C in that same section, just the whole.
Same thing, okay. Great.
I think we should add one because it's objective. Root barriers, I know for a fact, come in different sizes. And so, Chad, do you have a preference on, for street trees, root barriers being 18-inch root barrier, 24-inch root barrier?
We have to find out from Steve Kikuchi what's the appropriate way to do this. You could take everything I know about agriculture.
So we'll just leave it at root barriers now, and later we'll define exactly what that is.
Okay. We're good. This is amazing. We have 15 people who are getting really hitting that consensus. All right.
So we need a motion now?
So we ready for a motion?
Yeah.
I think.
Do we have the language to put up for?
So I think the language that Catherine proposed we put up, and then the motion can just say as modified.
Yeah, the motion would be to adopt the resolution as amended by staff.
That's it? I move that we adopt a resolution as adopted by staff. As amended by staff.
I second.
All in favor, say aye.
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 All not in favor, say nay. Awesome. Will we send out dates for the other meetings after January 1st? Is that what we're going to be doing?
Do you need
Yeah.
a separate motion on that?
Okay, cool. Adjourn.